Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Recently on this channel we have begun to look at the history of the Double Dragon series, along with the franchise's impact on gaming as a whole. Thus far we have already looked at the first 3 parts of the series, which now brings us around to Super Double Dragon, a game that was a departure from what we had seen previously in many different ways. This game was the first in the series to be published on the Super Nintendo, leading the way for the world of Double Dragon on modern hardware that simply was not available during the 1980s. In today's content we are going to be looking at this transition in detail and the gameplay experience this 16-bit entry delivered. What was it about this game that would lead to it failing to deliver on reaching the same heights as some of the previous Double Dragon games? Let's find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Super Double Dragon, and why the game was a complete embarrassment for the franchise. Yeah! As discussed on here a lot recently, Double Dragon's impact on the world of gaming was huge. Some would even say tremendous. The first game in the series, directed by Yoshihisa Kishimoto of Technos Japan, was a pioneering smash hit, offering up the first ever 2-player cooperative beat-em-up experience in history. This 1987 title put the Double Dragon brand on the map. In the following year of 1988, there was even better stuff to come, with the release of Double Dragon 2 The Revenge. This title, featuring all new levels to play, refined the Double Dragon experience, fixing the slowdown problems that could be found in the previous entry and introducing a range of new moves, giving players more control than ever before. Both of these games were truly genre-defining releases that would inspire the release of beat-em-ups from other companies, resulting in Capcom's Final Fight, Sega's Golden Axe and Konami's Crime Fighters. High-quality beat-em-ups had arrived. By the release of a third Double Dragon game though, the party would finally be over for Technos. The Japanese firm would make wrong decision after wrong decision with the publication of their next game. Unlike previous Double Dragons, Double Dragon 3 The Rosetta Stone would not be directed by Yoshihisa Kishimoto, or made internally within Technos at all for that matter, but instead was outsourced to be developed by East Technology. The gameplay and experience that was delivered with this one was such a departure from previous games that the series was almost unrecognisable by this point. There would also be a game called Double Dragon 3 The Sacred Stones that was released for the NES. Previously, all Double Dragon games were greatly altered for the system to offer more platforming based affairs, but Double Dragon 3 for the NES was a completely different game to what could be found in the arcades, and was plagued with issues too. You can learn more about the issues with both of these games by checking out my Double Dragon 3 video. But now, it's time to look at what came next for the series. After the 1990 release of Double Dragon 3 in the arcades, one thing that had become very apparent to Technos was that the arcade business had been slowly dwindling. There was less foot traffic through the door than ever before, and not even the company's egregious microtransaction in-game store function was enough to make the game a success. If anything, it just annoyed people, leading it to be dropped from the Japanese arcade release. Rather than choosing to work on another Double Dragon arcade game, instead Technos would change direction with the series, instead focusing on creating a game that would be available exclusively on home consoles. Considering that the NES had revolutionised the world of console gaming and arguably impacted on arcade gaming's profits, releasing the next title on Nintendo hardware made complete sense, seeing as the Super Nintendo was shaping up to be a highly successful console too. There was one bump in the road though when it came to accomplishing this feat. If you watched my previous video, the NES's Double Dragon 3 game sold relatively poorly, leaving Western publisher Acclaim with over 500,000 unsold copies. This would lead to the end of the relationship between Acclaim and Technos, and instead a new partnership with Trade West, Technos' new publisher, who were tasked with the manufacturing and distribution of their games in Europe and North America. Learning from previous mistakes, unlike the arcade version of Double Dragon 3, Super Double Dragon would be developed in-house by Technos, allowing further control over the project. Everything thus far seemed to be going in the right direction. After the success of WWF WrestleFest, the father of the Double Dragon series, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, was promoted from a director role within Technos to a producer role, leading to another gentleman sitting in the director's chair to oversee the creation of Super Double Dragon. This role fell to a man named Maneki Ebenuma, a lad who had become so enamoured with the Double Dragon series that he went on to seek employment at Technos specifically so that he would have the opportunity to work on future Double Dragon projects. So now we have discussed the road to Super Double Dragon, let's see what Maneki and his team managed to come up with. Bizarrely, there would be a range of differences between the version of the game released in the West and the version of the game that saw release in Japan. We shall discuss some of these differences shortly, but in order to stop things getting too complicated, we will focus on the Japanese release, known as Return of Double Dragon, as it is widely regarded as the most refined version. Rather than continuing the story of the previous Double Dragon games, Super Double Dragon appears to be a reboot of the franchise, bringing the familiar story to the table of martial artists Billy and Jimmy Lee setting off to save Marion from the Shadow Warrior gang. Despite all of this though, we never actually get to see Marion in the game. However, she is mentioned in the instruction manual and the game's packaging description, hence how we know this basic story. At face value, as you can see, Super Double Dragon shares many core elements with the rest of the series. The game offers a two-player cooperative beat-em-up affair where the brothers fight their way through a number of stages trying to reach Marion. As you can see, as expected, the game is graphically a lot better to look at than the previous console entries of the game, but I would say the title's art style is still in line with the earlier console games. Unlike the arcade Double Dragon 3 game that offered a different graphical style completely. Control wise, the ability to punch, kick and jump have all returned, but with the addition of the Super Nintendo's controller and its larger selection of buttons, players can now also guard against attacks. If the player times the guard button right, their character can not only defend against an enemy's punch, but they can also put certain enemies in an arm grab, leaving the enemy vulnerable to successive attacks. In addition to this, there is also the Dragon Power gauge, which is located underneath the life gauge. Players can fill this meter by holding down either the L or R button, then use this extra energy to unleash special attacks. The power of such moves vary depending on how full the Dragon Power gauge is, and if completely filled up, even regular moves do additional damage for a limited time. Super Double Dragon also marked the first installment in the series with differences between Billy and Jimmy, other than just a simple palette swap. In this game, the brothers have different hairstyles, differentiating them further, but more importantly, have their own individual fighting abilities, meaning each brother has a different moveset. In regards to other in-game mechanics, Mode A and Mode B make a return, which consists of one mode where players can hurt the other player when playing cooperatively, and one mode where you can't. I guess the choice between the two mainly came down to how much you wanted to annoy a sibling. Upon starting the playthrough in either mode, action starts out in a beautiful street setting, featuring casinos and neon lights in the background. Either the director of this game was a massive fan of Sega's first Streets of Rage title, or influence was drawn from the same source. The movie known as Streets of Fire, which is said to have also been a huge influence behind Final Fight. Action soon progresses to the inside of the casino, which sadly does not look as cool and flashy, but fruit machines are in the background to help set the scene. Players end up in a lift section pretty quickly to establish early on that Super Double Dragon is indeed a beat 'em up. I do like though that enemies jump onto the player's lift from a different lift. That's a bit different to be fair. Moving further up into the interior of the casino, things quickly look more Trump Towery. Another trope setting off beat 'em up games. The end of this area features a boss fight against a suit-wearing martial artist simply known as Steve. Sadly, the area features no boss music, so if you did not know any better, you would just assume he was a regular enemy. To be fair, Steve is as generic and boring as all of those YouTubers who pretended to be excited about Steve being included in Smash Brothers a few days ago. Imagine having that little talent that the only way you can get views on YouTube is pretending to be excited about whatever gaming news is trending, so you just upload the same content as everyone else. I can't even picture what it is like to have such little creativity. Sad stuff really. I don't know about you, but these thumbnails make me want to vomit. Thankfully for you, Big Daddy Top Hat doesn't need to be a trend whore. Yeah. Moving on, we enter an airport departure lounge. The stage features some great music and ambience that help set the pace. After brawling around the inside of the airport, it's not long until players find themselves on the runway itself, brawling in front of the aircraft. I guess international terrorism must have been less of a threat in 1992, as airport security doesn't seem to really care. These bloody days, they won't even let me bring a can of Coke through in my bag. A boss fight takes place against Jackson, a former boxing champion who once again does not feel particularly bossy due to a combination of his sprite size and a lack of boss music. Defeating him results in a bizarre stage transition involving the plane taking off next to the player. We soon find ourselves fighting through a city slum in another area that is typical of the beat 'em up genre. We could be playing Final Fight right now. In this Chinatown-like setting, players soon head inside a building and enter what appears to be a Kempo gym. Previous boss enemies resurface here as regular sprites as players head further up into this building. On the building roof, players take on the stage bosses, twin martial arts masters who own the gym, who have the ability to grab the players' kicks and twist their legs. We have Ron Fu in the yellow vest who specialises in kicks, and Ron Puyo in the red vest who specialises in punches. These gentlemen reportedly think of themselves as the real Double Dragons. Stage 4 takes place atop a moving lorry with some nice background scrolling being present to illustrate the vehicle's speed. Throughout this stage, enemies regularly clamber up the side of the vehicle in order to try and halt the player's progress. In a comedic moment, the lorry crashes, sending the players flying and moving action to the streets once more. Players then take on the stage boss, who is flanked by another enemy sprite. The boss himself is a fatty Boom Boom who can perform a Sonic the Hedgehog-esque spin jump attack. He does manage to make an escape though, leaving players to take on a doppelganger Lee brother, who can perform moves from their arsenal. Stage 5 sees players brawling through an industrial area, featuring a nostalgic remix of music found in the first Double Dragon game. It sounds awesome to be fair, and perhaps my favourite thing I've found in this game thus far. It's all very classic Double Dragon here, with fighting taking place in stairwells, barrels to throw around, and a number of other throwbacks. The cool stage rounds off with a boss fight against the same boss who ran away on stage 4. However, thankfully, he is possible to knock out and defeat on this occasion. Stage 6 takes place in a forest woodland area, another stage backdrop style that is synonymous with the series. The stage even presents some platforming elements, where players must jump over missing planks on a rickety drawbridge, with some planks even falling as the player treads on them. The stage overall is very short, and aside from what we have touched on, there is not much else to cover. The stage boss of the area is the giant gatekeeper of the enemy's hideout. He uses a special technique which is a middle kick feared by his comrades, named imaginatively as the Death Leg. This brings us to the final stage, the enemy's hideout, which once again looks like the closing stage of the first two Double Dragon games. There is a lot of elements here that are faithful to the original. The gameplay itself in this area is pretty much typical of your final areas found in these sort of games. The stage pretty much offers a boss rush, with many of the bosses players have fought previously respawning for further punch-ups here. There is also a lift section, which plays like a lift section in any typical beat 'em up, and there is generally just waves upon waves of enemies to keep players fully on their toes. This is a freaking long stage, ladies and gentlemen, which is a similar length to the entirety of the rest of the game. I think this is a tremendously huge stage, and nobody knows beat 'em ups better than I do. I knew about Streets of Rage 4 before anyone else knew. Streets of Rage Remake isn't real. Fake news. Great guy. Players finally end up in what appears to be the same room where the final fight occurs in the first two Double Dragon games, with yet another freaking boss rush taking place against all of the bosses in the game. At least this section though is accompanied by another wonderful remix of another track from the classic series. The final boss and last opponent to enter this gauntlet is a character known as Duke, a combatant who uses a flashy martial arts style. After a long fight and finally defeating this opponent, the game fades to black, leading to the credits rolling. Sadly, the game does not offer a closing cutscene, or specific ending of any sort, leading it up to the player to imagine the rescuing of Marion. As mentioned earlier in the video, there are differences between the Western Super Double Dragon and the Japanese Return of Double Dragon. These include most of the game background music being shuffled around between the two versions, and some extra gameplay tweaks being applied to the Return. For example, when it comes to using weapons, in the Return players can retrieve a boomerang after throwing it. They can also hit an opponent more than once successively with the Hurricane Kick. Between these two versions, enemy and weapon placement also varies, and damage given or taken varies too. Also, that super long final level we just talked about is only that long in Return of Double Dragon, and is significantly shorter in the Western release, that arrived 2 weeks earlier than that of its Japanese counterpart. Players can also adjust the game's difficulty in the Japanese version, whereas the Western version can only be played with one setting. The game would be reviewed in 1992 by both Nintendo Power and Superplay magazine, with both publications concluding that the title was okay, but generally very lackluster. The director of the project, Muneki Ibenuma, published a commentary on his involvement with the game back in 2004. The series superfan wished he had have done more with this game, and stated that he was unable to fully realise his vision due to the strict time constraints imposed on the game's development by Technos Japan. As you would have noticed earlier, the game features no in-game cutscenes to help establish or progress the narrative, a feature even the NES games included. Muneki mentions that leaving such a feature out was never the plan for the game, and there was even meant to be cutscenes prior to boss fights and between stages, let alone just an intro and proper ending. These cutscenes though were intended to depict the story of the brothers investigating the Shadow Warriors gang, following on from the disappearance of several prominent martial artists. The man set to be behind all of this was of course Duke, the game's final boss. But in the game's intended plot, he would have been revealed as a childhood friend of the Lee brothers who betrayed them. Marion was set to be a part of the story too, working as a policewoman, the occupation she held in the Double Dragon comic book series. She was intended to assist the Lee brothers along the way, but sadly was reduced to the mention in the instruction manual we covered earlier. Away from an improved story, if given longer to work on the game, Muneki would have added a lot more traps and obstacles to the stages to mix up gameplay a lot more, so that Super Double Dragon offers more than standard brawling. Technos rushing this game through resulted in the release of a fairly half-baked game that could have been vastly improved if given more time. Even the additional 2 weeks the Japanese version was given over the Western release illustrates what could have been achieved if they continued to give Muneki extra time with this title. Away from the game's weaknesses themselves, there would be further factors that would feed into this title being a complete embarrassment of a release for Technos. The fact that this game was half-baked simply meant that it could not compete against what was available on the market. Beat-em-ups were evolving at a faster and faster pace, and continuing to leave Double Dragon in the dust at every turn. On home consoles alone, Super Double Dragon was not in the same league as the likes of Golden Axe or Streets of Rage, let alone Streets of Rage 2, a game that would also see a Mega Drive release that year. But to be fair to Super Double Dragon, other games in the beat-em-up genre were not even the title's biggest hindrance. The title's main lack of appeal came from the fact that the title had been released on the Super Nintendo that had revolutionised gaming arguably even more than Double Dragon, and that game is of course Street Fighter 2, the game that would cause many consumers to buy a Super Nintendo in the first place. The game would arrive several months in most places before Super Double Dragon on the device, meaning that by the time the game did arrive on the hardware, the game looked extremely basic and rudimentary in comparison. Even if we look at Super Double Dragon and Street Fighter 2 being two different games from two different genres, for the casual market these were both martial arts games that included a lot of fighting, and one was a lot more impressive looking than the other. So to summarise, I guess the game was half-baked, rushed, and therefore could not compete with what else was available on the market. Technos had proper screwed up once again, arguably even worse than with Double Dragon 3. So it was getting quite sad that a franchise that was once so innovative was becoming more disappointing as the years went by. On a more positive retrospective side, at least Super Double Dragon remained faithful in gameplay, art direction, and the music used to that of Kishimoto's first two games, which is more than what can be said for Double Dragon 3. In fact, looking at Super Double Dragon, graphically, it looks how you would imagine the first two Double Dragon games would look if you gave them the Mario All-Star style treatment for the Super Nintendo, so at least they're in line with what came before them. So if you want an experience that feels like an NES Double Dragon game, but for the Super Nintendo, I guess Super Double Dragon is for you. But such a concept would not have been particularly nostalgic in 1992, and would instead result in a game that was extremely basic and dated in comparison to both its contemporaries and the emerging fighting game genre. In my opinion, the game has some charm, but with a brand as recognisable as Double Dragon, the game should have been so much more. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the mad story of Super Double Dragon, a game that was a complete embarrassment for Technos Japan, that failed to live up to consumer expectations in any way. Today's video was chosen by the tremendous people who back this channel on Patreon, who make it possible for me to work on content on a full-time basis, without having to pretend I'm excited about Steve appearing in Super Smash Bros. If you want to support a creator who doesn't chase trends but instead at least attempts to make half interesting content, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Basically, if you give me $5, me love you long time. Speaking of people me already love long time, sucky shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Doug Perkins, Corey Imarsh Sr., Lou Johnson, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Azra Warakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angela 35, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Prince Azana, Carlos Domingos, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sponge McBee, Gary Pingett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Ted Stickles, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Selagny, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Lamik Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bowell, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, RetroVersion.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai and Andrew Bazansky. I would like to thank all of you and all of my other patrons very much.